Hello and welcome to The Big Picture on University Radio Nottingham. I am Felix Hawes. Joining us today we have Ben.
Hello, Felix.
Hello, Ben. Ted.
Hello, Felix.
Hello, Ted. Hannah.
Hello, Felix.
Hello, Hannah. And a special guest, Lilian Greenwood MP for Nottingham South. Hello, Lilian.
Hello, Felix. I'm colleagues and very happy to be here.
Thank you very much for coming on Saturday to everybody. And I know particularly you, Lilian, you've got a very busy schedule being an MP, so very grateful for you to be on. So today's show is going to be slightly different to normal. So we're going to start with an interview with Lilian Greenwood. And then we're going to do our classic topics. So this time we'll be talking about the government's illegal immigration bill and then also the ongoing discussions about Matt Hancock's WhatsApp leaks and the Sue Gray appointment. So first of all, Lilian, thank you again for coming on. You are the Deputy Chief Whip, if my research is correct.
One of two. We have two Deputy Chief Whips.
Two Deputy Chief Whips, brilliant. And you've been the MP for Nottingham South since 2010.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, my research so far has been correct. So first of all, what do you think is your proudest achievement of being the MP for Nottingham South?
It's a really hard question to answer because over 13 years, despite having been in opposition the entire time that I've been a member of Parliament, and of course that's frustrating because you can't achieve the things that you would want to in politics, but nevertheless I think you can make a difference as a constituency MP, but of course also in the way that we're able to influence things at national level. And obviously it has been a pretty eventful 13 years in Parliament. But one of the things that I'm most proud of, and I get asked this question quite often, so one of the things I'm most proud of is that when I first was elected, one of the areas in my constituency is Clifton, which is primarily a large housing estate that was built as council housing in the 1950s. It was built very quickly in the 1950s, and the main method of building was something called wimpy no fines, which is basically concrete poured houses, and it's a great place, Clifton, but the houses are very cold and they don't have cavities, so you can't insulate them easily. And a lot of constituents told me that their houses were cold and that it was a concern. So at the time, the coalition government had a scheme that was around trying to enable people to insulate their homes. So I worked with the local council, Nottingham City Homes, the council housing provider, and using the government's then scheme to try to create a scheme that would offer everyone in Clifton, in one of the wimpy no fines homes, of which there are thousands, the opportunity to get their home insulated. Now, for council tenants, the council was going to invest in their homes to do the insulation, but for those who bought their own homes, and that's most of the people on the estate, we wanted to make sure that they weren't going to miss out on the opportunity. So there was a really good cross-tenure scheme to get those homes insulated. And obviously, if you insulate people's homes, you deliver warm homes which people can enjoy. I'm as amazed at meeting people who really only lived in one room of their house. The sadness is we're seeing that again because of energy prices. But so obviously warm homes, lower bills, saving energy, saving carbon, and also creating jobs, because solid wall insulation is something that there weren't loads of people with the skills to do it. So it was what you might call an everybody wins scheme. And now if you walk around Clifton Estate, there's more than, I think, probably 2,500 of the homes have had the solid wall insulation. They look great. People were able to choose what colour the insulation was on the outside of their houses, and people really liked that ability to kind of have an influence on whether they wanted to be corally pink or bright yellow or minty green. And and so it's a really visible thing that, you know, made the estate look better, made a real impact on people's lives. And of course, that was back in 2013 that we did that project. Even now, it's even more clear that that was the right thing to do. You know, when people are really struggling to heat their homes, when we know there are 19 million homes across the country that are inadequately insulated, I feel really proud of that work that we did. It's not the only thing I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of the tram extension, which obviously I
very helpful
today,
for us students. Yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah, but that's the one for me that I feel like went from being something that people were literally telling me on the street to something that we were able to deliver. And it wasn't without a parliamentary angle to it, because partway through, or really quite early on in the scheme, the government decided that I can't remember what it was called. I think it was called a sort of, it was like a Green Deal or something, but it wasn't called that. They decided it wasn't working very well, so they scrapped the scheme, that element of it, which caused consternation. We had to have a big campaign, and eventually having debates in Parliament and questions to ministers and various things, managed to get the government to contribute £5.5 million to enable us to complete that project, and also to start some of the rollout across the rest of the city to other hard-to-treat homes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shoes, the great work that a constituency MP can do. So thank you for that. So this week has been International Women's Day. Your colleague Jess Phillips, of course, lists the victims of assaults of women from assaults from men. What do you think can be done for Nottingham to be safer for women? And what sort of things can people do?
So I think there are a number of things that we can do to try and tackle violence against women and girls. It's an absolute scandal that so few of the crimes against women result in a successful prosecution. So obviously there are issues around ensuring that those who are victims of crime feel supported to report them, that when they do report them, they actually do receive the help and that they need. I think, women's willingness to come forward and report crimes against them, against the person, has probably been really massively bashed in the last year as a result of some of the very high profile issues in relation to the Metropolitan Police. Actually, I think Nottinghamshire Police have got a good record on tackling of trying to develop improved responses to domestic violence and to other violent crimes against women. But there's more to do. So it's developing an appropriate response. And of course, the nature of violence against women and girls, it's a whole range of things. When Jess reads out that list, that's a list of killed women. That is women who have been murdered, where the primary either suspect or perpetrator was a man. And sadly, this year it included the name of one of my constituents who was killed in a house fire in Clifton last year, along with her two daughters who don't appear on the list. So I actually intervened on Jess to add their names in. So I think there's issues around, obviously there's issues around enforcement, there's issues around prosecution, there are issues around creating an environment in which women come forward and seek help. But there's a much broader issue which all of us have a role in tackling, which is the pervading attitudes that underline that. It is about making sure that that in schools that we teach about what healthy relationships look like, that we try and tackle examples of sexism and misogyny. So I think, and obviously there's been a little something of a controversy this week, and there was a question in Prime Minister's questions about sex and relationships education, which I thought, I found it inconceivable that what Miriam Cates was saying. Was it Miriam Cates? I think it was. Yeah. Talking about something that allegedly was taught in a school. Obviously, that seemed to me an absolutely an outlier, and clearly should be investigated as a strange and odd case. But generally, I'd like to see much more support around sex and relationships education, teaching. It's relatively recently that's become mandatory, and we should be making sure that teachers and other people who work in schools are supported to deliver that sensible, age-appropriate curriculum, because that's a really important part of tackling underlying issues around violence.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that answer. So recently, Nottingham University students voted in favour of supporting strikes by the lecturers. The position of the Shadow Cabinet, if I'm correct, is for members of it not to appear at the picket line. Is that something that you agree with? I know you're bound by collective responsibility, but what do you think is the right attitude towards strikes from the Labour Party?
Well, look, the Labour Party was founded as the political wing of the trade union movement. It came out of the trade unions, and that's a key part of it, and the trade unions continue to play a really important part in the Labour Party. My route into Labour politics was through my trade union. I worked as a trade union organiser before I went into Parliament. And to be honest with you, the thing about picket lines just seems to me a bit of a weird red herring. When I was a trade union organiser, did I want Labour MPs to appear on picket lines? No, I wanted them to use their political voice to argue the case on behalf of our members about whatever issue it was that we were, that we were involved in industrial disputes about. And clearly, as a Labour MP, as a trade unionist, I never want people to be on strike. People who are on strike do that as a last resort when they don't feel that they're being listened to. If you go on strike, you lose a day's pay. Like, who wants that to be the position? What we would always want, and the Labour Party's position is, that we would want to have a partnership in a dialogue between employers and their representatives and trade unions, and we would seek to resolve disputes before they get to the level of strike action. Now, when we talk about, university staff, is this dispute has been rumbling on for as long as, years, isn't it? I mean, I have, met the UCU many times to talk about this issue. I've got 3 children. My youngest is still in higher education, and I know that her time in university has been disrupted by strike action. I know she would support the strike action and understand the position of lecturers who are particularly concerned not just about pay but conditions, but insecure work, I know, is a massive issue amongst staff working in higher education. I think those are genuine concerns, and I would like to see, and this is the position of the Labour Party, we would like to see employers and unions getting round the table and trying to resolve these issues so that no one has to be thinking that they need to take strike action. And I think that's true not just in the higher education sector, but obviously we're seeing strike action across a range of sectors. And unfortunately, I think the government, in a number of cases, have actually been upping the ante and making it more difficult to get to reach a sensible deal rather than less difficult. And I saw last night that they're now calling on the junior doctors who are due to go on strike on Monday morning, say, call off your strike and maybe we'll talk to you. Well, why are you doing that now? Why weren't you doing that months ago? Because that has clearly been an issue for a number of for a while. And I confess I have an interest in this because one of my daughters is a junior doctor who will be taking strike action on Monday.
Thank you for that answer. So you and looking at opinion polls, the majority of the population have quite a lot of issues with the current government. But if I could force you to name one issue in particular that you think is the biggest problem facing our country, what would you say it is? Well,
you're right. I have many, many issues with our current government. But I think if you're asking me, because thinking about the concerns that my constituents are raising with me, then their number one issue right now will be the economy. It will be the fact that prices are rising fast and their wages are not keeping track if they're in employment, and people are really struggling with the cost of living and they feel that the government is not doing enough to support them. And I think probably the most obvious and pressing issue is people's energy bills, and I touched on that a little earlier. I was going to say I don't think it's the government's fault that energy bills have risen. There are things that the government could have been doing over the last decade in which they've been in power to protect people, to improve our energy security, to insulate homes around this country. So there's a lot we could have been in a better position going into an energy crisis. Obviously, much of it, they could have been allowing onshore wind to be developed. They could have been supporting the development of other forms of renewable energy. But leaving that aside, clearly the primary thing that's driving the rise in energy prices in recent times is the war in Ukraine. I don't think they could have foreseen that. as a result of the worldwide increase in energy prices, energy producers are making absolutely enormous profits. We called for months and months and months as the Labour Party for a windfall tax. The government eventually had to do a screeching U-turn and introduce one, but it has massive loopholes in it, such that some energy producers are able to avoid that tax. They could fix that. They could use that money to provide more support to households around this country that are really struggling to pay their bills. Of course, actually, in the last few months, well, a little while ago now, isn't it? 6 months since we had the Truss premiership, they made life even worse for my constituents. So there were already lots of people who were facing problems with rising energy bills. Now I've got a number of constituents who face a massive increase in their mortgage payments as well as a result of the disastrous budget that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng put forward. So I suppose my main, if I had to pin down one, it would probably be the mismanagement of the economy and the failure to protect my constituents from the really problematic things that are happening.
Thank you. So you mentioned the economy. Do you think Labour can be trusted to manage the economy when Labour-controlled Nottingham City Council has been taken into special measures after a serious historical, financial and governance failings? I'm quoting there from an independent report. What would you make to that?
I absolutely think that Labour can be trusted on the economy, but we don't take that for granted. We know that we have to work to gain the trust of the British electorate, and that's why Rachel Reeves, who I hope will be the first female Chancellor in history, is so tough as the shadow Chancellor, and we are not making any promises that we cannot explain how we would fund them. And I think that is right. It's a massive responsibility on the part of a government to use taxpayers' money and spend it wisely. And so we have to prove that we are in a position that we're going to do that. Now, when it comes to Nottingham City Council, I have seen over the 13 years that I have been the MP the way in which Nottingham City Council has had its central funding from government cut and cut and cut. Where to start? We all heard that speech by Rishi Sunak when he was talking to a group of Conservatives, I think in Tunbridge Wells, about how what levelling up meant to him, which was taking money away from deprived inner city areas and redistributing it. Well, Nottingham is one of those places that has a deprived inner city, and we have had money taken away from us. And I think that has caused the council to have to try to think, how can we manage our finances in such a way that it doesn't have a devastating impact on our constituents. And I've got, I will hold my hands up that they have made errors. They made errors in relation to Robin Hood Energy. It was, admirable in what it was seeking to do, which was to protect some of the poorest families who were facing fuel poverty. It was trying to do something about that, but I think they underestimated the risks associated with operating in that energy market. That resulted, in a loss of, I think, £36 million. That £36 million is dwarfed by the amount of money that Nottingham City Council have lost as a result of reductions in government grant. The Nottingham City Council are working very hard. You're right, there's an improvement board in there, chaired by Sir Tony Redmond. I met him recently. He's been impressed with the leadership that's been shown by David Mellon and Adele Williams as the leader and deputy leader. He wants the pace of change to be quicker. Clearly, the council have accepted all those recommendations and then working hard to implement those now. Do I wish they hadn't made errors? Of course I do. And people are right to be asking questions and expect answers to those. But I don't think that undermines the case for Labour governance. And I think Nottingham City Council have delivered many, many good things in this city and worked really hard to protect absolutely vital services that I and all my constituents rely on.
Thank you very much for that answer. So in terms of one of the things that Labour are looking to do to fund some of their ideas is scrapping the non-dom status, which Rishi Sunak's wife is under. That's sort of where the discussion started to come from in the sort of general public's perception of this. Alistair Darling, the last Labour Chancellor, argued against scrapping the non-dom status when he was in office. He said that non-doms include people who come to this country to work in hospitals, universities and restaurants only for a few years. Do you disagree with Alistair Darling's assessment when he was Chancellor?
Well, clearly.
That is what I expected.
He's entitled to his view, but the view of the current Labour leadership is that if you are working here, if you are part of the UK, then you should be paying your taxes here.
Yeah, that's fair enough. My last question to you, and thank you for all your answers to all these questions, is which Conservative MP do you admire the most?
Oh, gosh. Let me think. That's a really hard question, because there are different people who I kind of like and admire for some of the work they do for different reasons. I'm not sure I have a favourite Conservative MP.
Michael Gove?
He wouldn't probably. I admire his chutzpah for going out dancing on the nightclubs and not so much about being photographed. I'll tell you one person on who I've changed my view, which is Anna Soubry, who was, of course, the former Conservative MP for Broxtowe. Is when Anna was first elected, we were quite often spar about a variety of things, but she was always someone who was prepared to stand her ground and not afraid to speak out against the leadership of the Conservative Party when she thought they had got it wrong. And of course, in time she ended up leaving the Conservative Party, and I think I saw her on Twitter the other day advocating voting for Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I saw that as well. Yeah,
very impressive. But I think there are a number of Conservative MPs who are not afraid to stand up for what they think is right, even though that puts them out of favour with the current leadership. So I think of Nigel Mills, who's the MP for Amber Valley, who I think came in at the same time as me, who has kind of spoken out on things that he thinks are wrong. So I think I'm quite admiring of anyone who actually, stands up for what they believe in, and even as a deputy chief whip.
Yes.
Say that I don't always enjoy it, but I do understand, that people want to, have strong principles and sometimes want to express them. And
if I may say so, you did go against Jeremy Corbyn when he was Labour leader, so you do have that yourself. You've stood by your principles against the leadership of your party as well.
Not a rebellious MP, but I rebelled. I think I've only actually rebelled once, which was around triggering Article 50, when I felt it was really clear that the government did not have a plan and didn't know what they were going to do around the Brexit negotiations, and I don't regret for a minute doing that, actually, although I've never had that conversation with the chief whip, so I'm sure he wouldn't agree with me.
All right, thank you very much, Lilian, for your answers there. Okay, Ben, we'll go to you first, as our other left-wing person today. What questions do you have, or question for Lilian do you have?
I was wondering if, as hopefully seems to be the trend, Labour is elected at the next election and hopefully stays in power for even 2-3 terms, there seems to be an increasing mood within the party membership for proportional representation or for some change to the voting system. And it seems to me that what the Corbyn years highlighted and what Keir Starmer's comments on momentum highlighted is that momentum left-wing faction of the Labour Party and what you'd call the right wing of the Labour Party, Social Democrats maybe, really can't productively coexist in the same party. And I think both sides have attributes. I think both sides are well motivated, but I don't think they can really function in one party, and it just leads to a history of conflict which keeps us out of power and leaves the Tories free to do whatever they want. So do you think, or does the leadership think, there is the time is right once it gets elected to start looking at changing the voting system to a more proportional system? I
I think there is an argument for changing to a more representative system. We are something of an outlier as a country and still operating under first past the post. And many of my colleagues would agree that that a form of proportional representation is desirable. Equally, I know I have a number of colleagues who absolutely would not agree, who want a Labour government that can enact a Labour manifesto without having to try and negotiate potentially with other parties or have the potential instability that a coalition government creates. And I think we can hold up great examples of political systems that produce coalitions and examples of where it leads to massive instability. So I don't think the electorate would kind of go that was their top issue by a long way, and I think there are many issues of our constitutional matters that we need to resolve, is that a priority one? I don't know. I think one of the most important issues that I would see constitutionally is the need to address the centralisation within Whitehall and move to more devolved structures. Obviously, we've had for a long time devolution to Scotland, Wales, more recently to Northern Ireland. We have a complete patchwork when it comes to devolution across England, and so for me, putting power closer to the hands of closer to the people who are affected by decisions, I think that's a priority. I think almost inevitably, and we've got obviously more proportional systems in relation to the devolved administration. So I think inevitably that is going to be a debate, isn't it? And quite rightly too.
Thank you. Ted, what questions do you have for Lilian?
Very simple one, Lilian. What is a man? What is a woman?
So why are you asking me that, Ted? What's your...
Just a very simple question.
It's a strange question to ask. What is a woman? It's an adult female. So for most women, it will be consistent with their biological sex. I think most people who are born and sexed as a woman as a girl, a child, will identify as a woman. But obviously, there are also people who transition their gender. I think they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And most of the time, it won't matter whether they were born biologically a woman or whether they have transitioned their gender and become a woman. I would expect them to be treated the same. However, sex and gender are not the same, and that's why within the Equality Act there is a protection in certain circumstances to not treat them as equal. But I kind of worry that that there's an attempt, I don't mean you, but more broadly, to kind of try and whip up a culture war around this issue, that for trans people, it's creating a sense of them being under attack, that they wouldn't feel safe. It really worries me. It worries me, and I don't see how it benefits anyone to be doing that. I want people to be able to live their lives as with freedom from discrimination and prejudice. And sadly, there is a really toxic kind of situation, particularly on social media, around these issues.
Thank you for that answer. Hannah, what is your question?
Firstly, thank you so much for coming in. It's been really interesting. My question is relating to private schools, because that's something that's quite important to me. It's got two parts to it. So firstly, I know Labour is planning that the policy is to take away the charitable status to use that to fund the state system. Firstly, Labour has said that it would do that in previous governments and it hasn't achieved it. So firstly, why do you think that is? And also, my concern is I understand that a lot of big private schools can afford to have that tax break taken away. But I personally went to a smaller private school that isn't very financially stable. And if they had to, if they were not given that tax break, it is likely that they would probably have to close down because they don't have enough funds. And also, that would by taking away the tax break, that might mean that there'd be less bursaries for students. So all of those students that either come from private schools that have shut or can't get into private schools because there aren't enough bursaries will then have to go into the state system. And the 1.7 billion I don't feel will be enough to really fund for for a state system that is already fairly stretched. So those are kind of my two questions. So firstly, why don't you think Labour have achieved it before? And also, are you not concerned about the extra pressure it could put on the state system?
I'm not sure I have an answer, Hannah, to why we haven't achieved it before. I'm not sure I mean, obviously, we haven't had lots and lots of Labour governments in the immediate past. I think we've set out that that's something that we aim to do in the new government, to use that money, that charitable status obviously creates tax breaks for private schools. We want to use that money to improve education for everyone. I think the private schools, if they can't function effectively as private schools are, can set up and make themselves open to the wider population. I don't think it's going to be a huge issue in terms of putting pressure on the state sector. I don't anticipate that. We don't want schools to close down if they have to then open themselves up to a broader intake and become part of, I mean, obviously we've got a plethora of different sorts of schools, whether they're free schools or academies or community schools. But I want every child to have a good education, and I don't think you should have to pay in order to obtain that, because for the vast majority of parents that is out of their, that is not something that they are able to do. And unfortunately, if you kind of look at society, British society, it's still massively advantageous to go to one of the top private schools, and I don't think it should be that way. I think every child should have the same opportunity to fulfil their potential, irrespective of where they are born and irrespective of the means that their parents have at their disposal. And actually, some of the things that I see in private schools, I kind of think, well, if it's good enough for kids in private schools, why are we not able to have the funds to be able, and the powers to do that in the state sector? Under this government, there's been a massive diminution of things like investment in arts and music education. I don't see private schools not offering arts and music education. Actually, they understand that's a really important part of the curriculum. And I think that, we should aim for every child to have a really broad and enriching education. And I think, part of the thinking is around using funding to ensure that we're able to offer that to every child.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lilian, for answering all those questions. And they were interesting questions as well. So thank you very much. So we're going to move on now to our topics. Our first one is on the government's plan to tackle illegal immigration. So the government wishes to make it the law to compel the Home Secretary to remove anyone coming to this country illegally to Rwanda or another safe third world country. This is after about 45,500 people crossed the channel last year. Once they have been removed, they will be banned from returning. Additionally, recently it's been announced that the UK is to give France roughly £500 million for detention centres to operate there. There are concerns that this bill will conflict with our duties under the European Human Rights Courts. So let's talk about this, and obviously we also will touch on Gary Lineker and Match of the Day as well on the BBC. Hannah, just to pose to you, and anyone can jump in on here, if this bill requires the UK to withdraw from the European Courts on Human Rights, that will put the UK in a very tiny club in Europe, just the UK, Russia and Belarus. Is that a group of countries that you'd be happy for the UK to be part of?
I mean, it's a really difficult question because on principle, I don't really have an issue with the UK pulling out of the European Court of Human Rights, because the whole point of Brexit was to become more independent. But when you put it like that we would be only, us and Russia and Belarus, I can see the issues with it. In terms of the bill, I do, on principle, I agree with it, because I think that this issue has gone on for far too long. And I think that the idea that, often these people who are coming here illegally do pass through other safe countries like France, but they all end up coming here. I think on principle I agree with it. I hope it does work because there will be the people who are very vulnerable, or it would be unsafe for them to be deported to a third country, will be allowed to stay as well. So it's not a blanket rule. There will be individual cases. I think time will tell. So I'm going to wait and see how things progress. I think it is a tricky situation because obviously the government does not want to be going against international law. So for me, I'm going to wait and see what happens. I hope it works because I think we have to do something. And I think this does need to be combined. I do agree that it needs to be combined with also tackling the gangs that are responsible for these people coming over. I think it needs to go hand in hand with that, and also hand in hand with ensuring that there are enough legal routes for legitimate migrants to come to this country. So I think it needs to be combined with those policies as well. Obviously we need to remain a compassionate country, but we need to do something, and I think this could work, but again, as I said, time will tell. So that's
I believe it is the case that about 75% of gang leaders are based in the UK. And if I'm not mistaken as well, Lee Anderson, Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, has said that there's not much point going after them because they've existed for a long time. Lilian, what is the Labour Party's position on this, and what do you think to this bill?
Oh, I was listening to what Hannah said, and much as you respect your right to think it, Hannah, I was just gonna.
Sorry.
Well, let me start with the European Convention on Human Rights. So nothing to do with Brexit. We were one of the countries that created the European Convention
Winston
on
Churchill,
Human
if I may
Rights
interrupt.
after the Second World War, because of the importance we recognised of human rights, especially in the light of what had happened in 1930s Germany. So when I was looking at the front of the bill. In fact, I'll read it because I have it in front of me.
Oh, you're very well prepared. Thank you.
Because I spotted it the other day. I didn't pull it out for this particularly, but I was looking at it. Let me just. Because it's disappeared now. It literally says on the front of the bill that I cannot say that this will not put us in contradiction with the European Convention on Human Rights. Any Home Secretary putting forward a bill which has to put that on the front cover, they should be giving themselves a good talking to. I mean, we want to be in a club with Russia and Belarus. Crikey, it's pretty shocking. So I think, from a moral standpoint, it is absolutely appalling. However, there are a number of other issues. No one wants to see people attempting to cross the English Channel in leaky, small boats, putting their lives at risk. So stopping people having to take make those risky journeys, absolutely, we agree on that. The point is that in the last few years, under successive Conservative Home Secretaries and Conservative governments, the problem has got not better, but worse. We have had, I think now, 4 pieces of legislation that we were told was going to stop this from happening, this illegal migration using small boats. It has not succeeded. It's very unclear. Obviously, we've had a government that have spent, I think it's now £140 million on a plan to deport people to Rwanda. Currently, not a single person has been deported to Rwanda. There are good questions about whether Rwanda is in fact a safe country for some people. I've been to Rwanda. I like it a lot. There's a lot to admire about Rwanda, but it doesn't have a fantastic... Currently, I think there is certainly repression within Rwanda. I'm not sure it would be a safe place for LGBT people to go to. So I think there are real questions about the practicality of the government's proposals. I find it impossible to believe that suddenly this version will work, whereas the previous ones haven't. I think there are a number of issues that the government are totally failing on. They're totally failing to tackle the criminal gangs who should be held to account for the way in which they are manipulating people and putting their lives at risk. Why do we have thousands of people living in hotel accommodation at the moment? because we have an asylum system that is broken. On that issue, I agree with the Home Secretary. We do have an asylum system that was broken. The trouble is, it's her government that has broken it. I think of the number of the people who crossed the Channel in small boats seeking asylum last year, 1%. 1% of their claims have been processed. It is an absolute scandal that people are, and I see it not in relation to asylum seekers who've crossed the Channel in small boats necessarily, but I see it in my casework in the constituency. People who are seeking a decision on an asylum claim, and they wait and they wait and they wait and they wait, and it's not a right way to treat anyone, because whilst they're here waiting for a decision on their asylum claim, they're not able to work. They may be living in totally inadequate accommodation, existing on a very small amount of money, if any money at all. It is an absolutely horrific system, and clearly we would want an asylum system that works, that deals with claims rapidly. We talk about legal routes. There are very few people who have any legal route to come to the UK. There are some people who are able to escape from Afghanistan in a legal route. There are lots of people who are not. Afghan interpreters, there is no legal route for them to get to the UK. People from Ukraine can come on a legal route, but across the rest of the world, probably not so much. So if you actually want people to come without taking risks, then you need to find a way of allowing people to claim asylum. Of course, where we are geographically positioned, are people going to reach other countries first? Probably. Almost all refugees either stay in the country where they are or move to a neighbouring country. There will be a small number of people who want to travel to the UK because they have links with the UK, because of our historic links with other parts of the world, because they speak English, because they've got family here. Seems to me entirely reasonable that we should provide some method for that we should play our role in supporting those who are forced to flee their countries because of political persecution, war or conflict, and we need to do that in a proper way. Of course, we need to talk to our partners across Europe, and we need to play our role. But this bill, I fear, is just cruel and unworkable.
Thank you, Ben. I think you share Lilian's view on this. Do you have anything more to add?
No, I'm in total agreement with Lilian. The European Convention on Human Rights was brought in, I believe, in 1950 to stop the kind of treatment and the atrocities committed during World War II from ever happening again. And the idea that as an act of national independence, you want to give it's somehow a sign of independence to now make it possible for you to return to that sort of conduct is unthinkable, and it's not any kind of patriotism that I subscribe to. And Lilian's second point is these criminal gangs operate throughout Europe. It's not just they're in Britain, and you can't really solve this problem without cooperation across Europe to tackle the criminal gangs across Europe. So what we need to discard of is this rhetoric that anything European is bad. Any kind of international cooperation is bad because it restricts our national independence. It actually restricts our ability to solve any of these international problems if we continue with this rhetoric of any wider international cooperation is a bad thing. So I'm in total agreement with Lilian.
Thank you, Ben. Ted, do you have anything to make to anything of the comments that have been said?
I think for me, we shouldn't be looking at it, in the framework of we either scrap our plans to deal with the small boats, or we leave the ECHR. There is precedent in this country for letting Parliament, as Parliament is sovereign, to override the judgment of the ECHR. It happened, I believe, sometime around 2012 with the right to give prisoners the vote. ECHR said to the Cameron government, no, you must let prisoners vote. And Parliament, as is sovereign, decided to overrule that judgment. Ironically, I disagree with that and agree with the judgment of the ECHR. But that's not the point. It is inhumane, as Lilian said, to allow people to keep coming to this country via small boats, and I would like more legal routes of immigration to be opened up. But something has to be done about the deaths that are occurring in the Channel and the numbers that we're housing in hotels each year. I agree with Lilian that I don't think it will make a difference, because I don't think this government will override or leave the ECHR, and I think this bill will be shut down immediately in the ECHR. But what I'd like to see Britain do is deal with the problem by ECHR saying to UK, as I think they will do, that this is illegal, and just overriding it. I think that's the best way. And also, I'm not saying it's a perfect solution. Rwanda, I also have concerns about Rwanda. The opening up of of deporting to a third country, Rwanda or otherwise, I'd rather the other countries be found. But I'm also yet to hear any ideas from the Labour Party on this, or anyone else. All I'm hearing is, no, this won't work, this won't work, this won't work. UK government is trying to put forward solutions, and all we're hearing is criticism instead of any alternative.
Thank you. I imagine that Labour does have an alternative, but I am going to move on to the next topic, if that's okay, Lilian.
We absolutely do, and it is some of the things I've said, which is tackling, getting the asylum system working effectively and promptly. It is tackling the criminal gangs by setting up specific police unit. It is working with our friends and neighbours in France and Belgium. We have set all that out, but time we should move on.
Those are just broad frameworks, not actual ideas of any concrete.
They absolutely are.
Okay, all right. Gary Lineker is our next one. This is obviously causing quite a stir at the moment in the BBC. So Gary Lineker hosts Match of the Day, football show. I personally don't watch it, but he's very popular, the BBC's most paid star. He made comparisons to the government's rhetoric and with the Germany in the 1930s. That has been condemned by the former Labour MP and UK anti-Semitism czar, Lord John Mann. But what about his suspension from the programme after offering his political views or views on a political issue? It's not unique for a member of the BBC that isn't in the news department to voice their political opinions. Lord Sugar, who is, of course, from The Apprentice, personally endorsed Boris Johnson before and had made comparisons between Jeremy Corbyn and the Nazis. And Deborah Meaden on Dragon's Den regularly criticises the government. So what do you think is different about Gary Lineker, and do you think the suspension is the right way forward about the BBC and the protection of impartiality, Ted?
I think it is a difficult one. I won't surprise anyone that I massively disagree with Gary Lineker's comments. I also am very much looking forward to a Match of the Day programme without the punditry. I cannot stand it, regardless of Gary Lineker's views. But there is an importance to protect free speech. We more so in the right, we bang on about free speech than anyone else does, and then we've got a case here. We do. I can see the listeners. Ben's pulling a face right now. We tend to do so much more, but we can't then, okay, well, this person says something left-wing, let's cancel them. We can't do that. But there is... The BBC as an employer has its impartiality rules. I don't know enough about them to comment whether Gary Lineker has violated them. He is not a news correspondent, so I don't know whether he has broken those rules. I do find, though, rather funny, shall we say, that he's gained a lot of support from his colleagues this morning and last night, of the commentators who will not be on the programme today. Alex Scott will not be appearing on Football Focus in solidarity. I do find the whole sort of spectacle about standing in solidarity with this man who's being taken to the cleaners whilst he's earning so much money a year rather pathetic, to be honest.
Lilian, what do you think to this?
I'm quite admiring of the solidarity.
They're very left.
On, BBC. No, just kind of saying, we're going to stand together and call something out as wrong. I mean, I think the thing that I find most, I'm always very wary of ever making a comparison with Nazi Germany, because it is such, to compare anything to the Holocaust is a bit crass and not terribly helpful generally. But I absolutely agree, actually, on the free speech issue, that Gary Lineker is welcome. He's able to express that view if he wishes. And I think he may, the wider point that I think he was seeking to make is some of the rhetoric used by the Home Secretary has been really troubling, frankly, because, genocides, of course, don't start with that. And I don't think the government are, in danger of becoming a genocide. But I do think they've used language that I think is inflammatory and I find really distasteful and offensive. But that's perhaps a wider issue. I think the issue for me is about impartiality in the BBC and the fact that it seems to have been applied so inconsistently, as we have a chairman of the BBC who we now know helped to organise an £800,000 loan to the Conservative Prime Minister. We have, as you said, impartiality rules that are. Gary Lineker seems to be treated very harshly and suspended for a match of the day, but Lord Sugar and various other Jeremy Clarkson was allowed to appear on Question Time. I mean, I'm okay. I'm fine with impartiality rules. It's really important that the BBC, as a trusted national broadcaster, is seen to be impartial. But you have to apply the rules fairly and consistently. So I think that's the wider issue. If it's brought that to light, then all well and good.
Brilliant, thank you. So moving on now to our other topic. Ben, start with you. Sue Gray has been appointed as the Chief of Staff, or at least offered the job of Chief of Staff by Keir Starmer. She, of course, was known for investigating Partygate in Downing Street. It's unclear at the moment when exactly Keir Starmer offered the job to Sue Gray and whether or not Sue Gray broke any civil service rules about letting them know that she was in talks with the opposition. What do you make to that?
Well, the truth is I'm not sure how much there is to say about this. I'm not convinced it's... I'm sure that no guidelines have been broken or no procedure has been broken in the appointment process. I think it's hard to deny it's bad optics. But to be honest, I think it's a bit of a non-story. I think it was a bit clumsy appointing it so quickly, but I'm sure procedure has been followed. She has a tremendous career, Sue Gray, so she'll be a worthwhile asset to the Labour Party, and maybe the British public will actually take it as a sign that the Tory Party is so out of control that figures in the civil service, when they leave now, feel the desire to try and be part of a mission to restore dignity and effectiveness to government.
Thank you. It should be pointed out, we did mention last week on the show that it's being reported that Sue Gray was the... Kemi Badenoch, when she was appointed Business Secretary, wanted Sue Gray to be the Permanent Secretary, but she was blocked by Simon Case, who's someone that we regularly bring up on the big picture for his antics. Hannah, what do you think?
I wish she hadn't been appointed, and it's not political for me, because I would feel exactly the same if the Conservatives had appointed someone that's supposed to be neutral. I think the big problem for me is obviously Sue Gray did this report into Boris Johnson. Now, I do not question the validity of that report at all. I am very glad he resigned. He was not fit for office. I'm very glad he's gone. However, there have already been talks, from the Bring Back Boris group, who are wanting, him to come back, and they will use this as a way to say that Sue Gray was not impartial when she did this report. So that is my concern, that will give them ammunition. I'm not questioning her validity at all. I think she is a very hardworking civil servant, but I think optically it's really bad, and unfortunately politics is all about optics. So I agree. I think if Keir Starmer was going to appoint her, he should have waited a little longer, because it's very recent news, this. And I think optically it's really bad, and I do worry that it is going to give ammunition to that group. So I wish he hadn't done it. And I also wish that when he was asked when did he ask her to fulfill this, when did he approach her about this job, he was asked about 5 or 6 times by Nick Ferrari on LBC, and he didn't give a straight answer. And I think if he wants to, I'm not saying, I'm sure procedures have been followed. I'm not accusing Keir Starmer of not following procedures, but...
I will.
Okay, well, but we don't know. But I wish that when he was asked, he did say, because then that would have made it look more above board, personally. So I wish he hadn't done it. Optically it's really bad, and I worry that it's just going to give more of a voice to these people, I don't know why they want Boris back, but for some people do, and it is going to give them ammunition. So I feel that we can maybe agree on that point.
We'll agree, Hannah.
Well, we are lucky to have a member of the shadow government with us. Lilian, do you know when Keir Starmer started talking to Sue Gray about this job?
absolutely no idea when
No.
Sue Gray applied for this job, and you wouldn't expect me to be involved in the appointments process for members of the leader's office. I mean, I think, you know, from everything I know about Sue Gray, from having seen the work that she's done, she seems to have been an incredibly dedicated public servant with the highest ethics of the civil service. So I'd be amazed if she did anything that was inappropriate. Clearly, if you accept a job outside of the civil service and you're a senior civil servant, there is a process to be gone through. There's a committee who make comment on, and there has to be a waiting period. Often it's kind of 3 to 6 months, and I guess you know, Sue Gray and the leader's office would have known that at the point at which they offered her the position. It isn't exactly unusual for senior people working in the public sector to go and work for a leader of the opposition or an incoming prime minister. It happened under David Cameron. It happened under Tony Blair. Now Lord Frost was, of course, working previously for the government, and then went on to become a Conservative peer. So I think, you know, I understand. Do I understand the optics? I mean, I think what's ironic, from what you were saying, Hannah, is that people were heaping praise on Sue Gray last year when she produced the report into the parties in Downing Street for how fair-minded she had been. And some people wanted her to be more critical, or to have gone further in investigating parties in the Prime Minister's private residence and all the rest of it. And they seem the same people now who are saying, no, she wasn't. She was. You know, she wasn't impartial. I suspect if she does have a political view, as I'm sure lots of civil servants privately do, that she worked even harder to make sure that she was impartial, because I know political people I know who work in politically restricted jobs always even more conscious of needing to act impartially when they're at work.
Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, I don't think we have a Johnson supporter here, so we'll have to try Nadine Dorris or Jacob Rees-Mogg in the future.
Next week.
Yeah.
Invite them in.
Yeah, see what happens. Ted, one of the messages that Matt Hancock was leaked said about scaring the public about a variant. What do you think to that?
I find it truly disgusting. The whole WhatsApp saga has made me really sad, to be honest. As someone who was very sceptical of the lockdowns throughout, to see them talking in the way they did, see Simon Case laughing about the restrictions that are putting on people's lives, to deliberately scare the public when, to be honest, for the vast majority of people, there wasn't something to be scared about, shows a real sociopathic tendency, to be honest. And yeah, this is real insight into the workings, the mindset of the government. Sort of the other messages about Matt Hancock being aware very early on, or relatively early on, that 14 days was an unnecessary period of isolation, but going forward with it because of the bad optics that it would give the government that they were wrong in the first place, instead of doing, well, no, this is the right thing to do, so let's do it. Masks in schools just because Nicola Sturgeon has done it in Scotland. It gives us a real insight into the lockdowns, which we were constantly reminded was following the science. That was the tagline which we all got sick of. And it turns out, no, they weren't. They were, for a large part, doing things in a way that they thought was most beneficial for them.
Last comment of the show, Lilian, what do you make to these Matt Hancock leaks?
I think my main thought is, how could Matt Hancock have been so stupid to give the entirety of his WhatsApp messages to Isabel Oakeshott? And I think her behaviour was pretty appalling as well, to have ghostwritten his book and signed a non-disclosure agreement and then put them all in the press. However, you know, it's right that we look at what happened during the pandemic. That's precisely why we have the COVID inquiry, and it's really important that that inquiry gets on, has access to all the information, including things that were done. You know, there's a bit of me kind of worries about things that were communications that happened on WhatsApp, and whether we will even be able to access all of those, because obviously, you know, we should know about the way in which decisions were made in government. And, you know, I actually agree with Ted about the importance of following the science and in order to have the trust of people. So I hope that inquiry is going to be able to deliver us lots of answers, but I don't think anyone will be really crying for Matt Hancock right now. I don't think his reputation was already at a pretty low level. I think it's sunk even lower.
Maybe I have to rewatch some of those trials on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here.
No, I couldn't agree more than one.
Thank you everyone for coming on today, especially thank you to Lilian Greenwood to come here on out of your very, very busy schedule. See you all next week. Thank you very much. Thank you.